may be famous for its maple syrup and autumn leaves, but behind the postcard-perfect scenery lies a much darker history. From covered bridges where broken hearts still linger, to abandoned mountains that seem to swallow people whole. These are the places where footsteps echo without a source, and whispers travel on a wind that shouldn't be there. Today, we're counting down 30 of Vermont's most haunted locations, steeped in legend, tragedy, and tales locals still swear are true. Number 1. Emily's Bridge. If you drive through the quiet postcard-perfect town of Stowe, Vermont, the kind of place where church steeples pierce the mountain sky and maple leaves crunch beneath your boots, you'll eventually find yourself on a narrow dirt road called Goldbrook Road. At first, nothing about it feels unusual. The road twists gently, the trees press close, and the sound of the brook bubbling alongside is almost soothing. But then, you see it. A weathered wooden-covered bridge, standing like a dark mouth over the water. Its timbers are deep brown, almost black in the shadows, and the roofline dips slightly with age. The locals call it Emily's Bridge, though on any map you'll find it listed as the Gold Brook Bridge, built in 1844. It's just 50 feet long. That's it. In daylight, it seems almost quaint, the kind of place tourists photograph on autumn foliage tours. But after sundown, the air changes here. It's as if the trees lean in a little closer, the brook quiets, and the night swallows the sound of your footsteps. And that's when Emily comes. Every Vermont ghost story collection has a chapter on Emily's Bridge, but the versions of her tale vary. The one most often told to outsiders goes something like this. In the mid to late 1800s, there was a young woman named Emily. No one remembers her last name anymore, and perhaps that's part of the tragedy. She was said to be in love, deeply, hopelessly, the way young women often are in small towns where life is predictable and a single romance can feel like destiny. Her beau was a local boy from a good family, and the two were planning to run away together. Depending on who you ask, the reason was either that her parents disapproved or that his family did. The plan was simple. They would meet at the bridge under the cover of darkness and escape together, riding toward a new life. But on that night, Emily waited and waited, and the man never came. Some say he had a change of heart and married someone else. Others whisper that he died before he could arrive, thrown from his horse, struck down by fate itself. In the most dramatic versions, Emily discovered the betrayal when she saw his wedding to another woman in the village. What we know for certain, if we can call any of this certain, is that Emily's heartbreak drove her to despair. In some tellings, she tied a length of rope to the rafters inside the bridge and hanged herself. In others, she leapt from the bridge into the brook below, her skirts ballooning like a ghost's shroud before the cold water swallowed her. Whatever the truth, the Goldbrook Bridge became Emily's Bridge, and she never left. The earliest written accounts of Emily's haunting date back at least to the 1960s, when paranormal investigators began documenting strange occurrences here. The most common reports are physical. Scratches appearing on the paint of parked cars, often while the owners are still sitting inside. In some cases, the marks were deep enough to score bare metal, like the slash of nails or claws. Men, in particular, seem to provoke Emily's wrath. Drivers have reported their vehicles rocking as if something heavy pressed against them. Male visitors claim to have felt hands grab their shoulders or shove them forward. Women, by contrast, often hear only the soft sound of weeping or a faint voice whispering their name. Then there are the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving across the bridge's wooden planks when no one else is present. Photographers setting up tripods late at night have caught streaks of light or mist that seem to coil like smoke in the darkness. Some have left with bruises in the shape of handprints on their arms. And there are the voices. Ghost hunters using EVP, electronic voice phenomena, recorders have captured chilling snippets. A low, breathy "go home," a mournful "please wait," and once a sharp, angry "get out," so loud it clipped the microphone. The Goldbrook Bridge is one of the last remaining historic covered bridges in the state, a relic of 19th century New England craftsmanship. Built in 1844, it was designed in the Howe truss style, a method using heavy timber and iron rods to withstand both the weight of wagons and the deep Vermont winters. Covered bridges were not just functional, they were community landmarks. Weddings, dances, and Sunday strolls often passed through them. Their roofs kept snow off the planks, preserving the wood for decades longer than an open bridge could last. But these same enclosed spaces could become isolated, shadowy places, perfect for whispered meetings, or for tragedies that went unnoticed until morning. One of the most chilling first-hand accounts came from a retired truck driver who had never heard of the bridge's reputation. He stopped there one summer night to check a strange noise in his vehicle. As he stood on the bridge with his flashlight, he felt a sudden, bone-deep cold that raised goosebumps along his arms. Then something invisible brushed past him, hard enough to make him stumble. When he looked down, his forearm had 3 long, angry red scratches. They faded within minutes, but the memory never did. The town of Stowe has mixed feelings about Emily's Bridge. On one hand, it's a tourist draw. On the other, the influx of late-night visitors brings noise, litter, and occasional vandalism. There have been efforts to keep thrill seekers from parking directly on the bridge, but the legend is too strong to be fenced off entirely. During the day, you'll see hikers, cyclists, and photographers taking in the quaint beauty. But the locals will tell you, and they'll say it with a small, knowing smile, that beauty is only half the truth. Because after dark, Emily waits. And if you listen closely enough, you might just hear her steps approaching from the shadows. Number 2. Eddy House. If you follow the winding roads of rural Vermont long enough, you may come upon a quiet, almost unassuming building nestled among the trees in Chittenden. Today, it operates as the High Life Ski Club, a cozy lodge for winter sports enthusiasts. But beneath its cheerful present lies a past that made this little town the center of one of the most extraordinary and controversial chapters in American paranormal history. Locals know it as the Eddy House, former home of the Eddy brothers, 2 of the most famous spirit mediums of the 19th century. Their story is not just another New England ghost yarn. It's part of the documented history of American spiritualism, written about by journalists, visited by skeptics and believers alike, and forever etched into the folklore of Vermont. The tale begins in the mid-1800s, when William and Horatio Eddy were born into a family with a strange legacy. From early childhood, the brothers exhibited what their mother called the gift, the ability to see and hear spirits. By the age of 10, they were already giving impromptu seances, though in those days, such abilities were as likely to be feared as admired. The Eddy's parents, far from hiding their children's talents, encouraged them to display them publicly. This was the height of the spiritualist movement in America, a time when seances, table rapping, and attempts to communicate with the dead were not only fashionable in big cities, but considered a new frontier of science and religion. By the 1870s, the brothers were holding seances at the Green Tavern, a modest inn owned by their family in Chittenden. What happened inside those walls would make Chittenden famous and infamous across the country. Picture a cold Vermont evening in 1874. The guests, farmers, school teachers, journalists, and the occasional wealthy traveler from Boston or New York gather in the dimly lit tavern parlor. The air smells faintly of kerosene lamps and wood smoke. The Eddys sit at a plain wooden table, their hands resting lightly on its surface. The seance begins with quiet conversation, then soft knocking sounds from the walls. A chair slides across the floor without anyone touching it. The table vibrates under their fingers. Witnesses claim that, as the minutes pass, full-bodied apparitions begin to appear, not just faint wisps, but solid figures dressed in the clothing of centuries past. Some are said to speak, offering messages to the living. Others silently drift across the room before vanishing. One of the most chilling accounts describes the figure of a young Native American girl who would appear near the fireplace, her black hair hanging damp as though she had just emerged from a river. Her eyes, witnesses said, seemed fixed on some far-off sorrow.
Number 3. The Quechee Inn at Marshland Farm, Quechee. There's a certain magic to Vermont, a kind of quiet spell that hangs in the air where old farmhouses lean into the wind as if whispering secrets, and the smell of wood smoke carries with it a memory of centuries past. But sometimes, that spell isn't so gentle. Sometimes it's the kind that wraps itself around you with cold fingers and refuses to let go. That's the kind of magic you'll find at the Quechee Inn at Marshland Farm, a historic inn that has seen everything from Revolutionary War soldiers to wealthy 19th century landowners. And if you believe the stories, it still plays host to those who never truly checked out. The story of the Quechee Inn begins in 1793, when Colonel Joseph Marsh, one of Vermont's most prominent early settlers and the state's very first lieutenant governor, built the stately home on rolling farmland near the Ottauquechee River. This was no ordinary man. Marsh wasn't just a political leader. He was a veteran of the Revolutionary War, a man who'd seen America's birth up close and perhaps even felt the fragile uncertainty of its early days. His home was built with the hallmarks of New England Federal-style architecture: solid timber beams, wide plank floors, a central fireplace that could warm an army, and windows that looked out over green pastures and the distant hills of what was then still untamed land. But the Marsh family's story, and the land it sat on, would soon gather shadows. The Marsh family farm thrived for decades, producing crops and livestock while serving as a prominent fixture in the local community. Guests from far-off towns would come to stay, bringing news of the wider world. But as the years passed and generations changed, the family's fortunes waned. The farmland was sold, repurposed, and eventually transformed into a guest house, the Quechee Inn, sometime in the mid-20th century. It was here that guests began to report oddities: a rocking chair moving on its own in an empty room, a cold spot that clung to one corner of the parlor no matter how high the fire burned, a shadow that seemed to stand at the end of a hallway, just long enough to register in your mind before vanishing. The Quechee Inn's Revolutionary War connection has inspired another persistent story: the ghost of a colonial soldier dressed in tattered uniform, who sometimes appears in the downstairs parlor. Guests have reported entering the room late at night to find a man seated by the fireplace, his head bowed as if in thought. His boots are muddied, his coat is worn, and when they speak to him, he simply vanishes, leaving behind a faint smell of wood smoke and damp earth. Number 4, Vermont Police Academy. There's something about old hospitals that lingers. Not just the smell of disinfectant or the faint echo of footsteps down tiled corridors, but a weight, an invisible heaviness. Like the air itself remembers the suffering. Now imagine this: a long white building standing quiet on a hill in Pittsford, Vermont. Today, it's a training ground for law enforcement, the Vermont Police Academy. But in the early 1900s, it was something very different: a tuberculosis hospital. And if you know your history, you know that meant one thing: not everyone who checked in checked out. Before antibiotics, tuberculosis, or consumption as it was called, was one of the most feared diseases in America. It wasn't fast like cholera, and it wasn't dramatic like the plague. It was slow, cruel, and intimate. Your lungs became prisons. You coughed until you bled. You wasted away in bed, watching the ceiling while your family prayed outside your room. Vermont was hit hard in the early 1900s, and Pittsford became the home of the state's largest sanatorium. It was here that patients, often young, sometimes entire families, were brought in hopes that the mountain air would heal them. Fresh air treatments meant patients were wheeled outside in winter, bundled under blankets, with frost collecting on their eyelashes. They believed the cold could freeze the infection. It didn't. Among the staff was a young nurse named Mary, kind, soft-spoken, with the kind of face that made patients feel safe. She was the sort of person who remembered your name, knew your favorite soup, and held your hand during the long, silent nights when you coughed so hard you couldn't speak. Mary had seen death before. Every nurse had. But tuberculosis was different. It was drawn out, it was personal, and the patients became family. In the winter of 1914, Mary herself began coughing. She tried to hide it from her supervisors. But the disease didn't care about uniforms or duty. She was admitted to the very ward where she had once tended others. And just like them, she never left. By the 1960s, tuberculosis had been mostly eradicated in the U.S. The hospital closed, the beds were removed, and the smell of antiseptic was replaced by the smell of boot polish and gun oil. The building was reborn as the Vermont Police Academy, a place where recruits learned firearms, tactics, and the long tradition of American law enforcement. But the new tenants soon discovered that some of the old tenants hadn't moved on. Picture it. A young cadet lying in bed after a grueling day of training, too tired to even undress. His eyes drift shut. And then, a faint click. The old call button light flickers in the hallway. Soft footsteps approach. The sheets at the end of his bed pull themselves snug, and somewhere in the darkness, a woman's voice whispers, "Rest now, you're safe here." Number 5, Glastonbury Mountain. If you've ever stood in the Green Mountains on a crisp autumn day, you know how peaceful Vermont can feel. The smell of pine, the quiet hum of wind through the trees, the crunch of leaves underfoot. But there's one place in this otherwise postcard-perfect landscape where that peace vanishes, replaced by something far older, far darker. This is Glastonbury Mountain, a place so steeped in mystery, tragedy, and legend that locals have whispered about it for centuries. Some call it Vermont's Bermuda Triangle. Others simply call it cursed. Glastonbury Mountain rises just over 3,700 feet above sea level, its slopes draped in thick forest and remote wilderness. From a distance, it's beautiful, a hiker's dream. But those who know its history say beauty here is a trap. For the Abenaki people, the mountain was not a place for casual exploration. Legends say this was a sacred and dangerous place, home to spirits that could lure travelers off the path, never to return. They spoke of stone giants that roamed the upper slopes, and of a place where the four winds met, creating unnatural weather shifts. Most importantly, they warned that the land was not meant for human settlement. Early European settlers didn't heed that warning. By the mid-1800s, a small town had formed near the base of the mountain, centered around the logging and charcoal industries. It was called Glastonbury, the same name as the mountain itself. But life here was hard. The soil was rocky, the winters brutal, and the mountain seemed to push back against those who tried to tame it. By the late 19th century, the industry collapsed, the railroad shut down, and the town emptied almost overnight. Glastonbury became a ghost town, quite literally. Fast forward to the 20th century, and Glastonbury Mountain became the epicenter of what would later be called the Bennington Triangle, an area of southern Vermont where an unusual number of people have vanished without a trace. Between 1945 and 1950, 5 disappearances baffled authorities and terrified locals. 1. Mitty Rivers, 1945. On November 12, 1945, 74-year-old Mitty Rivers, a seasoned hunting guide, led a group through the area. He was known to know these woods better than anyone. But on the way back, just minutes ahead of the others, he vanished. No sound, no signs of struggle. The only clue? A single rifle cartridge found in a stream. His body was never recovered. Tu, Paula Velden, 1946. Perhaps the most famous case. Paula was an 18-year-old Bennington College student who set off alone for a hike on the long trail in December 1946. Witnesses saw her walking toward the mountain wearing a red coat, a detail that would become haunting later. A massive search involving the FBI and even aircraft turned up nothing. To this day, her fate is unknown. 3. James Tedford, 1949. Tedford, a veteran, was traveling home to Bennington by bus. Multiple passengers reported seeing him in his seat just before the final stop. But when the bus arrived, he was gone. His belongings were still on board. Some believe his disappearance is connected to the mountain, as his route passed directly through the triangle. 4. Paul Jepson, 1950. An 8-year-old boy, Paul vanished from his family's truck while his mother tended to pigs on the farm. Searchers found that bloodhounds tracked his scent straight toward Glastonbury Mountain. The trail abruptly stopped, as if he'd been lifted from the ground. Fring, Frida Langer, 1950. The only victim whose body was found. Frida slipped into a stream during a hike and returned to camp to change clothes. She never made it back. After months of searching, her remains were discovered in an area that had been thoroughly searched before. Her cause of death could not be determined due to the condition of the remains. These disappearances sparked a wave of speculation that still swirls today. Some believe the mountain hides dangerous sinkholes or mine shafts that swallowed the victims. Others point to wild animals or sudden weather shifts. Then there are the more chilling theories. A serial predator using the remote terrain as cover, or an unknown force connected to the Native American legends. The Abenaki story of a cursed land where the four winds meet feels eerily in sync with the way searchers often reported strange weather patterns on the mountain. Sudden, thick fog or dead silence in the forest where no birds or insects could be heard. Some hikers claim that compasses spin wildly here, GPS units fail, and trails seem to shift direction, leading even experienced outdoorsmen into disorientation. Locals will tell you, half in jest and half in warning, if you leave the trail on Glastonbury Mountain, you may not come back. At the base of the mountain, the remnants of the old town of Glastonbury still stand, crumbling foundations, rusting equipment, the skeletal remains of a railroad track. Urban explorers who have ventured there claim the air feels heavier, the woods unnaturally still. Some say you can hear the echo of axes and saws from the logging days, or voices carried on the wind from the abandoned buildings. There's also the legend of the phantom train, an old steam whistle that some swear they've heard on foggy mornings, even though the tracks have been gone for nearly a century. Today, Glastonbury Mountain is part of the Green Mountain National Forest. There are no active roads leading into the old town, and the trails are remote and difficult. If you decide to visit, experienced hikers advise you to never go alone. Always stay on marked paths and keep track of the time. Fog can roll in quickly, and cell service is unreliable at best. Many paranormal investigators still make the journey, hoping to glimpse the red-coated figure or record EVPs of voices in the wind. Whether you believe in curses or not, one thing is certain. Glastonbury Mountain holds its secrets tightly, and sometimes it holds on to those who come looking for them. Number 6. Opera House at Enosburg Falls. In the small northern Vermont town of Enosburg Falls, there stands a proud brick building with tall windows and ornate woodwork. To the casual eye, it looks like many other late 19th century civic buildings, a relic of a time when small towns built big, beautiful places to prove their worth. But step inside, and you'll find a space that has echoed with music, laughter, applause, and something else, something softer, something that whispers through the rafters when the crowd has gone home. This is the Opera House at Enosburg Falls, built in 1892. For over a century, it has been a stage for theater, concerts, graduations, and speeches. But ask the townspeople what else it holds, and many will tell you about a boy named Willie, a child who loved the theater so much he never left. The late 1800s was an age of ambition for Vermont towns. Railroads brought commerce, new industries grew, and towns like Enosburg Falls wanted to show they could stand shoulder to shoulder with New England's finest. The Opera House was the answer, a grand performance hall with rich acoustics, soaring ceilings, and an upstairs balcony where citizens could gather to hear traveling orchestras or watch vaudeville performers roll into town with their costumes and tricks. It wasn't just for entertainment. The building doubled as a community hub. Graduations, town meetings, and political speeches were held beneath its golden proscenium arch. The Opera House was where the town celebrated its triumphs and mourned its losses. It was, in every sense, home. But like many homes, it came with a story. His name was Willie, the son of a stagehand who worked behind the scenes at the Opera House. In those days, it wasn't unusual for children to tag along with their parents, especially when their fathers worked long hours in the evenings. Willie was no different. He loved the building, loved the smell of sawdust and oil lamps, and most of all, loved climbing into the attic where old props and costumes were stored. It was in that attic, high above the stage, where tragedy struck. One afternoon, while exploring as children do, Willie slipped. He broke his leg badly. In an era before modern medicine and antibiotics, what might have been treatable today became life-threatening then. Infection set in, fever rose, and within days, Willie was gone. His father was devastated. The Opera House, the very building where he had earned his living, had taken his son. Yet the family stayed in Enosburg Falls, and the story of Willie faded into local memory. Until, that is, strange things began happening inside the theater.
The first reports were small: a misplaced hammer during set construction, a missing program booklet that turned up backstage after the show had ended, props vanishing only to be found in the attic where no one had been. Then came the footsteps. Actors rehearsing alone late at night swore they heard the sound of small shoes running above them in the attic. Light, quick, playful. But when they climbed up to check, there was nothing but dust and wooden beams. One actress told of hearing a giggle behind her just as she stepped onto stage. When she turned, the wings were empty. Soon, the theater community began calling the spirit by name, Willie. Over the years, countless performers and staff have shared their brushes with Willie. A director in the 1970s recalled locking up late one night when he heard someone running across the stage behind him. The sound was too light to be an adult. When he turned on the stage lights, the boards were empty. A janitor swore that every time he stacked chairs after community meetings, the same chair would tip over when his back was turned. He began leaving it out as an offering to Willie. Most recently, a visiting troupe in the 2000s reported that several of their costumes were mysteriously moved from their trunks into the attic, a prank no one confessed to. None of these encounters left anyone harmed, but all left them convinced that Willie was still around, still curious, still playing in the only home he ever knew. Today, the Opera House continues to host plays, concerts, and community events. Audiences laugh, applaud, and cheer, just as they did in 1892. But somewhere above, in the dim attic rafters, a little boy still listens. If you're lucky, as the lights go down and the stage glows bright, you might hear him scurrying across the boards above, eager to catch the show. Because in Enosburg Falls, the curtain never really falls. Not for Willie, not for the Opera House that keeps his spirit alive. Number 7. Bowman House. Tucked away in the quiet village of Cuttingsville, Vermont, stands one of the most hauntingly beautiful structures in the state, Laurel Hall, better known to locals as the Bowman House. At first glance, it could be mistaken for a castle, its Gothic revival turrets and ornate stonework rising sharply against the surrounding green hills. But behind its elegant facade lies a tale so drenched in grief and unanswered questions that the house itself seems to exhale sorrow into the cold mountain air. The mansion was the creation of John Porter Bowman, a wealthy tanner and businessman in the late 1800s. Bowman was not a man accustomed to loss, at least not until tragedy struck with brutal precision. His beloved wife, Jenny, and both of their daughters, Addie and Ella, died within a few short years of each other. Bowman's grief was consuming. He not only constructed a lavish family mausoleum nearby, but also began work on Laurel Hall in 1880, not to live in, but as a memorial to the life he'd lost. Locals whispered that Bowman built the home so his family's spirits would have a place to dwell, a kind of earthly anchor between this world and the next. He never took up full-time residence here. Instead, he would spend his days visiting the mausoleum, talking to his wife and children as though they were simply in another room. His devotion was heartbreaking and a little unsettling. Over the decades, Laurel Hall became something else entirely, a place where the veil between the living and the dead seemed paper-thin. Visitors and caretakers began reporting the apparition of a woman in Victorian black, believed to be Jenny Bowman herself, appearing most often in the upper hallways. Even more unsettling were the phantom cries of an infant, echoing faintly from the nursery room, though there were no surviving children in the Bowman family line. Perhaps the most unnerving detail, and the one that keeps paranormal investigators awake at night, is the dark stain at the top of the grand staircase. No amount of scrubbing has removed it, and its shape seems to shift slightly over the years, like an ink blot with a mind of its own. Some believe it marks the spot where a family tragedy occurred, though no records confirm anything of the sort. Others claim the stain is a psychic scar, the lingering energy of grief so intense that it burned itself into the very bones of the house. Today, Laurel Hall remains one of Vermont's most iconic haunted sites, a place where beauty and sorrow are permanently intertwined. Those who've walked its halls say the Bowman House doesn't just feel haunted, it feels lonely, as though it's still waiting for its family to come home. And perhaps, in some spectral way, they already have. Number 8. Norwich University. In the rolling hills of Northfield, Vermont, stands Norwich University, the oldest private military college in the United States, founded in 1819. Its imposing brick halls, immaculate drill fields, and strict military order mask a truth whispered about by generations of cadets. This campus is alive with more than just tradition. Its ghosts are as disciplined, determined, and territorial as any soldier who ever walked its parade grounds. The most notorious of these legends begins in Alumni Hall, where one room has been sealed shut for decades. Behind its boarded door, they say, lies the tragic history of two brothers, cadets who occupied the same room years apart. The first took his own life in that very space. Years later, the second, unaware of his sibling's fate, suffered the same end. After that, no one could stand to live there. Strange noises, whispers at night, and an unshakable sense of dread drove every new occupant out. Eventually, the door was nailed shut. But still, late at night, cadets swear they hear faint knocking from the other side. Then there's Chaplain Hall, a building that seems to reject the laws of physics entirely. Here, books have been seen floating across the library, sometimes sliding from shelves in slow, deliberate motions, as if guided by invisible hands. Others tell of the faint sound of pages turning when no one is near. But it's in Hawkins Hall and Ransom Hall where things get personal and terrifying. Students report waking in the dead of night, utterly unable to move, their bodies paralyzed while shadowy figures loom over their beds. The figures never speak, never touch, but the icy air and the pounding in the victims' chests make it clear that whatever is watching them is aware. And then there's Sabine Field, the heart of Norwich's military drills. During daylight, it's a place of precision and discipline. At night, some have seen a woman in white pacing its perimeter, her back ramrod straight, as if guarding it from intruders. No one knows her story, but veterans claim she is as much a part of Norwich's watch as the living cadets who stand sentry. It's the variety of these hauntings that makes Norwich University so unique. Not one story, but many, scattered across its historic halls like tactical positions on a battlefield. Every ghost here seems to have its own mission, its own duty to fulfill, and perhaps that's what keeps them tethered to this place. After all, in the military, the oath to serve doesn't always end with death. Number 9. Lake Bomosine. On the western edge of Vermont, nestled between thick forests and quiet hills, lies Lake Bomosine, a stretch of water so calm it could be mistaken for glass. But beneath that stillness is the ghost of a town, and the memory of 3 men who rowed away one night and never came back. In the early 1900s, West Castleton was a bustling slate mining community. Barges ferried stone, taverns buzzed with workers, and the lake was the main artery of life. But as the industry collapsed, families left, houses emptied, and by the 1930s, the town was nothing more than a shell. Silent buildings staring at the water like hollow-eyed sentinels. That's when the story begins. One moonlit night, 3 men left the shore in a small rowboat, bound for a tavern across the water. Locals say they were laughing, their lanterns swaying gently as they disappeared into the mist. Hours passed. The tavern keeper never saw them. Searchers combed the lake. Not a splinter of wood, not a body, not even an oar was found. Today, fishermen and late-night wanderers claim they still see that same rowboat, gliding silently across the lake's surface. The oars dip into the water, but there are no ripples. Inside, 3 shadowy figures sit hunched, their faces hidden beneath old caps. Sometimes the boat fades into the fog. Other times it simply vanishes. The ghost town remains on shore, its crumbling ruins watching over the lake like mourners frozen in time. And at night, when the moon hangs low and the air is perfectly still, it's hard not to wonder, are the men still rowing, trapped in some endless crossing? Or is the lake itself keeping them, refusing to let go of what it claimed? On Lake Bomosine, some departures have no destination. Number 10, University of Vermont. By day, the University of Vermont in Burlington hums with the energy of 13,000 students. Laughter in the quads, lectures echoing in old lecture halls, the steady rhythm of campus life. But when night falls, the buildings keep a different kind of company. One that's been here far longer than the current class. It starts at the counseling center, where staff whisper about Captain John Knabb, a long-dead seafarer who slams doors with the force of a storm at sea. His presence is felt in the sudden gust of cold air in otherwise warm rooms, and in the way even sturdy doors rattle like they're afraid. Across campus at the Public Relations Building, the story belongs to John E. Booth, a former occupant who died long before the university took over. After hours, the quiet is shattered by sudden pounding, like someone's fists on the walls, demanding to be let out. No one is ever there. Then there's the bittersweet house, its name charming enough to hide the fact that it's home to Margaret Smith's ghost. She appears in hallways in period dress, her figure vanishing when approached, leaving only the faint scent of old perfume. But perhaps the most unsettling is Converse Hall. In 1920, a student named Henry took his own life here, and since then, students report waking in the night to find their belongings scattered across the floor, lights flickering on and off, and, most chillingly, the sound of someone pacing just outside their locked door. Every building has its ghost. Every name has a story. And for a campus this size, that means you're never far from a haunting. Here, history doesn't sit quietly in the archives. It walks the halls, opens doors, and sometimes, if you're unlucky enough, stands right behind you. Number 11, the Equinox Golf Resort and Spa. On the edge of Vermont's Green Mountains, where rolling hills turn gold in the autumn light and snow settles like icing sugar in winter, sits the Equinox Golf Resort and Spa, a sprawling white-clad beacon of history and hospitality. Tourists come for its award-winning golf course, its luxury spa treatments, and its old-world charm. But if you listen to the staff, especially those who've worked the night shift, you'll hear that it's not just the living who roam these halls. Built in 1769, long before Vermont became a state, the inn began as a simple lodging house for travelers passing through Manchester. Over the centuries, it transformed into a grand resort that catered to America's elite. But its most famous guest, and the one who allegedly never left, is Mary Todd Lincoln, wife of President Abraham Lincoln. It was the summer of 1865, and America was reeling from one of its darkest chapters. The Civil War had ended, but Lincoln had been assassinated just months earlier. Mary Todd Lincoln was devastated, crushed under the weight of her grief and the loss of not only her husband, but several of her children over the years. Her surviving son, Robert, arranged for a change of scenery, a summer retreat in the cool mountain air of Vermont. Mary traveled to the Equinox with at least one of her children, seeking solitude away from Washington's political turmoil. Historical records suggest she enjoyed the resort's gardens, the mountain views, and the quiet privacy the rural town offered. But she didn't stay long. She returned to Illinois, and from there her life only spiraled further into loneliness and ill health. And yet, if the witnesses are to be believed, part of her stayed behind. For more than a century, guests and staff have reported strange encounters in the oldest sections of the resort. It often begins innocuously, a glimpse of a woman in black Victorian mourning dress, moving silently through a hallway or standing by a window, gazing out toward the mountains. "She was there for a second and then she wasn't," one guest recalled. "I looked back and it was just empty space, but I can still tell you the color of the fabric on her gown." Employees speak of a faint floral perfume that lingers in otherwise empty rooms, the kind of scent that belonged to another era. Some even claim to have heard the soft rustle of skirts sweeping across polished floors. Mary's apparition is usually calm, almost regal in demeanor. But there's something in her presence, a heaviness, a sadness, that many say they feel long after the sighting ends. What unsettles people most, however, is when Mary is not alone. Several accounts describe a small boy or girl, never quite the same age, sometimes just a blur of a child, trailing behind her or darting into adjoining rooms. One late-night guest claimed she saw the pair crossing a hallway. The woman was walking ahead and the child kept trying to catch up. "I thought maybe it was some kind of historical reenactment, but they didn't make a sound. Not even the floor creaked." The child is believed to be one of Mary's sons, possibly Willie Lincoln, who died at just 11 years old in the White House during the Civil War, or perhaps Eddie, who died even younger. The sightings never last long. As with Mary herself, they vanish the moment attention is drawn to them, leaving behind only the echo of footsteps or the faint sense that someone just passed by. It's not just the apparitions that keep the Equinox's ghost story alive. Many visitors report an unshakable feeling of being watched, especially in certain older guest rooms and on the main staircase. Housekeepers have mentioned entering rooms to find rocking chairs swaying gently, as if someone had just gotten up. Doors sometimes swing shut without explanation, though there's no draft. Security cameras have captured odd flashes of light in empty corridors, too bright to be a reflection, too quick to be explained away as a passing car. In one incident, a staff member swears they saw a figure in Victorian dress glide across the lobby after hours, but when they checked the cameras, the hallway was empty. Theories abound about why Mary Todd Lincoln's spirit would linger at the Equinox. Some believe her visit to the resort was one of her last moments of relative peace before her later years, which were marked by mental illness, debt, and public humiliation. Others think she may have felt a deep connection to the quiet beauty of Manchester, a place untouched by the chaos of Washington. Then there's the possibility that her apparition is tied not to the resort itself, but to a memory, a loop of time where she walks alongside her lost child, replaying a summer they once shared. Paranormal researchers who have investigated the Equinox note that residual hauntings, ghostly echoes of the past, often occur in places with intense emotional energy. For Mary, that summer in Vermont may have been a bittersweet pause between immense loss and the slow unraveling of her later life. Unlike many famous haunted hotels, there are no reports of aggression or danger tied to the Equinox's spirits. Mary doesn't knock things over, shout, or startle people deliberately. Her appearances are fleeting, her movements quiet. Perhaps that's why her legend endures, because it isn't about fear but about grief, memory, and the way love lingers long after death. Number 12. Hartness House Inn. Tucked away in the quiet town of Springfield, Vermont, the Hartness House Inn looks at first glance like a perfectly preserved slice of early 20th century luxury. Its sprawling stone facade, steep roof lines, and manicured gardens radiate old-world charm. Guests arrive expecting the comfort of a high-end historic inn, fine dining, soft beds, and a taste of the past. What many don't realize, however, is that the Hartness House doesn't just remember its history, it seems to still be living it. The inn was once the home of James Hartness, a man who was equal parts inventor, astronomer, industrialist, and eventually governor of Vermont. Hartness was a figure ahead of his time. He held more than 100 patents, particularly in precision measurement tools, and was deeply fascinated by science and engineering. But one of his most unusual creations still lies beneath the property, a network of stone-lined underground tunnels. These tunnels, which Hartness personally designed and had built in the early 1900s, were no mere novelty. They were intended as a personal workspace where he could tinker in peace, far from distractions. They include laboratories, offices, and even living quarters, all hidden beneath the earth. The tunnels are wide enough to walk comfortably, their walls lined with rock, the air cool and still, and, according to many guests and staff, still occupied. The Hartness House Inn eventually became a public lodging establishment, but the tunnels remain, drawing curious visitors who want to walk in the footsteps of one of Vermont's most eccentric minds. And yet, for some, that walk turns into something far stranger. Reports of paranormal activity here are not fleeting whispers. They are consistent, detailed, and often eerily similar. Guests have claimed to enter their rooms to find personal belongings inexplicably moved. A book left on the nightstand may be discovered hours later sitting neatly on the desk, or a phone charger will vanish entirely, only to reappear in a completely different room the next day. These incidents are so frequent that some staff members jokingly refer to them as Hartness borrowing things. But the most unnerving reports often come from the tunnels themselves. Visitors walking through the stone corridors sometimes feel a sudden drop in temperature, a sharp chill that lingers for a few steps before dissipating as if they've passed through an invisible cold pocket. Others have heard faint metallic tapping echoing through the tunnel walls, as though someone is working with tools in an adjoining space that doesn't exist.
The lights are another curiosity. Electricity in the tunnels and certain rooms above sometimes flickers or dims without warning. This isn't the kind of sporadic flicker caused by an old bulb. Witnesses say the lights will pulse in a steady, rhythmic pattern for several seconds, almost like Morse code, before returning to normal. Technicians have inspected the wiring and found no obvious faults. Staff members, especially those who work in the inn during quieter off-season months, have shared their own unsettling encounters. One longtime employee recalls locking up the dining room late one night and hearing the sound of paper rustling and the faint scratch of a pen coming from the empty lounge. When she investigated, the room was completely dark, but a single sheet of paper was sitting in the middle of a table, where moments before the surface had been bare. On the paper, she found a strange series of sketches, gears, levers, and small mechanical components. No guest had been checked into that area of the building at the time. For those who believe, the explanation is clear. James Hartness never truly left his beloved home and laboratory. They say he still wanders the property, moving through the tunnels, curious about the modern world, but unwilling to abandon the work that defined his life. His spirit, they suggest, isn't malicious, rather, it's simply busy. He tinkers with electrical systems, borrows objects, and occasionally tries to communicate through flickering lights or the placement of small items. For the skeptics, of course, there are possible explanations. Old wiring, drafts in the tunnels, guests misplacing their belongings. But even they admit there's something about the Hartness house that feels unusual. It's not an oppressive or frightening presence, but a persistent one, as if the building itself hums with a low, constant energy. The tunnels in particular have a way of affecting people. Some guests report an overwhelming sense of focus when walking them, as though stepping into the underground spaces tunes their mind to the same inventive wavelength that Hartness himself thrived on. Others find the tunnels disorienting, claiming to lose track of time or emerging with the uneasy feeling that someone had been quietly observing their movements. Interestingly, the Hartness house is still tied to the world of astronomy. The property houses a museum dedicated to Hartness's work and the history of telescopes. Even visitors who come purely for the science sometimes leave with a story about an unexplained flicker of light or the feeling of a presence at their shoulder.
One of the most famous local legends tied to the inn concerns a visiting engineer in the 1980s. Staying for a weekend conference, he decided to explore the tunnels alone late at night. He brought with him a handheld recorder to dictate notes for a design he was working on. When he played back the tape later, in addition to his own voice, there was a faint but distinct whisper in the background. "Yes, but it won't work that way." The engineer, startled, had no explanation and claimed he had been entirely alone at the time. Today, the Hartness House Inn embraces its haunted reputation cautiously. It doesn't market itself as a ghost hotel, but it doesn't shy away from the stories either. Guests who ask are often given a polite smile and a brief history of James Hartness's inventions, along with a suggestion to visit the tunnels. Whether you come for the fine dining, the architecture, the astronomy museum, or the promise of a brush with the paranormal, one thing is certain. The Hartness House is not an ordinary inn. It's a place where history feels alive, where the walls and tunnels still hum with the restless creativity of a man who refused to waste a moment of his life, and perhaps hasn't stopped working even in death. Some leave with nothing more than fond memories and a few photos. Others leave convinced they've had a personal encounter with the inn's spectral resident. But all who visit leave with the same impression. The Hartness House isn't just a relic of Vermont's past. It's still very much in motion, its story still being written, one unexplained event at a time. And if you wake in the night to see your phone charger missing, your lights flickering, or the faint sound of tapping from deep below your feet, don't be alarmed. You may simply have caught the attention of James Hartness himself, still working, still curious, still at home. Number 13. Southern Vermont College. Perched on the side of Mount Anthony, Southern Vermont College wasn't just known for its sweeping views of the Green Mountains, it was also known for the imposing Everett Mansion, the campus centerpiece. Built in 1911 by wealthy businessman Edward Everett, this sprawling stone estate carries with it the kind of history that practically invites ghost stories. Though the college closed in 2019, the mansion remains, its Gothic presence still looming over Bennington, and according to those who spent time within its walls, the spirits haven't gone anywhere. Students and faculty alike reported seeing the apparition of Edward Everett's second wife, drifting through the hallways in a long gown as if she were still hosting grand dinners in the early 20th century. Some even claim Everett himself can be seen, often near the library, his gaze fixed on the mountains as though he's still surveying his domain. But perhaps the most unnerving figure is the hooded specter, silent, faceless, and often glimpsed only from the corner of one's eye, who is said to haunt the upper levels. The activity here is far from subtle. Smoke has been seen mysteriously filling hallways with no source. Doors that were firmly locked are found wide open just minutes later, and heavy footsteps echo across the third floor when it's known to be empty. Former staff members say the most active spot is the old maid's quarters, where the air feels perpetually cold, even in the height of summer. For decades, students would challenge each other to spend the night in certain parts of the mansion, but few lasted past midnight. They'd leave shaken, muttering about whispers in their ears, shadows that moved against the walls, and the creeping sensation of being watched from every direction. The combination of its majestic yet foreboding architecture, the presence of multiple distinct apparitions, and a long history of consistent paranormal reports makes Southern Vermont College's Everett Mansion one of the state's most fascinating and chilling haunted landmarks. Even without the college's bustling activity, locals say the spirits of Everett Mansion are still there, walking the same halls they have for over a century, waiting for the next curious visitor to step inside. Number 14. Brattleboro Retreat Tower, Brattleboro. On a quiet hill overlooking the town of Brattleboro stands a stone tower with a history as haunting as the view it commands. Built in 1887 by patients of the Brattleboro Retreat, one of the oldest mental health institutions in the country, founded in 1834, The structure was meant as a scenic lookout, a place where patients could enjoy the beauty of the surrounding green mountains. But its story took a darker turn that would leave a permanent scar on the land. The tower quickly became infamous for a string of tragedies. Several patients, struggling under the weight of their mental illness, climbed to its upper platform and leapt. The deaths were so numerous and so deeply disturbing that the retreat eventually sealed the tower to the public, hoping to put an end to its grim reputation. But if you talk to locals, they'll tell you the tower never truly closed, at least not for those who linger on the other side. Visitors and staff have reported seeing spectral figures atop the tower, sometimes pacing, sometimes standing unnervingly still at the edge. Most chilling are the recurring sightings of apparitions leaping into the air, only to vanish before they hit the ground. Witnesses describe the heart-stopping moment when they rush forward to help, only to realize no one is there. Some even claim to hear the echo of a scream or the heavy rush of wind as if someone has just fallen past them. The stone walls, weathered by over a century of Vermont winters, seem to hold the memory of these lost souls. Paranormal investigators have reported sudden drops in temperature, unexplained EMF spikes, and a heavy, oppressive feeling at the base of the tower. Even in daylight, the place radiates a sense of melancholy, the kind that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. The Brattleboro Retreat Tower stands as a stark reminder of a time when mental health was poorly understood and tragedies often went unspoken. Today, it's a magnet for ghost hunters and the morbidly curious, drawn by tales of phantom leaps and shadowy forms. Whether you believe the stories or not, one thing is certain. The tower's history is carved deep into the town's memory, and its ghosts, real or imagined, are never far from sight. Number 15. Marble Inn. In the quiet town of Fairhaven, where marble once brought prosperity and grandeur, a historic inn stands as both a relic of that golden era and a gateway to something far more unsettling. The Marble Inn, with its stately 19th century facade and warm old-world charm, has welcomed travelers for well over a century. But along with its reputation for hospitality comes a much darker claim that some of its most devoted guests and owners never truly checked out. The most frequently seen spirit is that of a former owner, a dignified man in a gray suit, often spotted in the lobby or by the grand staircase. Witnesses say he carries himself with an air of quiet authority, as though still keeping watch over his beloved inn. His appearances are so vivid that guests have been known to greet him, only to watch in shock as he fades before their eyes. Down in the basement, a far more melancholy presence resides, the apparition of a young woman. Some describe her as pale and sorrowful, others as simply lost, drifting between the old stone walls. Local lore suggests she may have been a maid, or perhaps someone who sought refuge here during a difficult chapter of her life. Whatever her story, those who encounter her speak of a heavy sadness that lingers long after they've left the basement. Then there are the children. Footsteps patter down the upstairs hallway at all hours of the night, accompanied by faint giggles and whispers. Doors have been known to open on their own, as if in the middle of some unseen game. Guests have reported waking in the small hours to find shadowy figures standing at the foot of their beds, sometimes adults, sometimes the unmistakable silhouettes of children. More than one visitor has checked out early, unable to shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Marble Inn's combination of spectral personalities makes it uniquely unnerving. A stately owner in the parlor, a lonely woman in the basement, children running freely where no children are staying. It's a layering of eras and energies that defies easy explanation. Paranormal teams have recorded unexplained voices, sudden cold spots, and the distinct sensation of being touched by unseen hands. For Fairhaven locals, the Marble Inn is as much a part of the town's ghost lore as it is its history. Whether you come seeking a charming Vermont getaway or hoping to meet one of its permanent residents, one thing is certain. This is a place where the past doesn't just linger, it walks the halls.